Hello and welcome to the shop and another episode of Shit Gets Fixed. In this episode, we're gonna fix some shit on this. This is a 2006 BMW F650 GS in the color of red. Its 652cc single-cylinder double overhead cam engine produces a whopping 50 horsepower. When it was first released in 1993, many BMW motorcycle enthusiasts considered it the bastard stepchild because it was the first single-cylinder motorcycle made by BMW since the absolutely stunning R27 made in the mid-1960s. Not to mention, it was the first chain-drive motorcycle BMW ever made. Back in 1993, this made many BMW motorcycle enthusiasts bonkers. In fact, it drove most of them to pure insanity. That's why back in 1993, most BMW riders started dressing like this and wearing helmets like this one. In fact, they're still doing this today. That's how mental this single cylinder and chain drive thing made them. The BMW F650 GS is in for a simple oil change. But before we get to that, let me remind you to please like and subscribe. And if you can handle the tremendous amount of tomfoolery, and that's Mr. Foolery to you, please watch the entire video. It makes all the difference to the success of this channel. All right, let's get right to the beamer. Since BMW is known for sometimes producing, how shall I put this, overly complicated motorcycles, and as a courtesy to our studio audience members and our viewers at home, I've laid out all the tools we will need to perform the oil change on the F650. I'm joking, of course. We're not going to need the framing nailer, but everything else we will definitely need. So to prepare the BMW for our oil change, I've removed the seat, this upper bodywork panel, and I've also removed the lower engine guard. And now you're asking yourself, why would he remove an upper bodywork panel if we're doing an oil change down here? And that's a very good question. It's because the F650 GS employs a dry sump lubrication system. And now you're asking yourself, what is a dry sump lubrication system? Well, I think this is a perfect time for a you-know-what. An explainer! I've assembled a simplified model of both wet sump and dry sump lubrication systems used by internal combustion engines. Let's start with the wet sump variant. Most petrol-powered cars and trucks on the road today have a wet sump lubrication system. In fact, your car or truck at home most likely has a wet sump system. Let's take a closer look. Okay, in a wet sump system, oil is collected and kept at the bottom of the engine case or oil pan. An oil pump pulls oil from there and pushes it through an oil filter, and then it's sent to all the frictiony bits of our engine, and it starts the process over again. Let's change our wet sump system over to a dry sump system. The biggest difference with a dry sump system is that the oil is only collected at the bottom of the case or oil pan, but does not live there. It lives over here in the oil tank, and it gets there via the scavenge pump. So only a small amount of oil is maintained in the engine case or oil pan. The oil pump then pulls oil from the oil tank and pushes it through the oil filter and onto the frictiony bits of our engine, and then it starts the process over again. So, our BMW F650 GS has a dry sump system, but that's really not that special. Harley-Davidson has used a dry sump system since the mid-1930s. There are advantages and disadvantages to both wet and dry system types. The major advantage to the wet system is it's less complex and therefore cheaper to manufacture. Its primary disadvantage is in high-speed cornering, acceleration, or braking. The oil can slosh to one side of the sump, and this can cause a temporary disruption of oil flow to the system. The dry system is obviously more complex with external tanks and hoses, and therefore it costs more. But by design, it performs much better in high-performance engines and can deliver more consistent oil pressure to individual friction-y bits. So there you go, a simplified explainer of the wet sump versus dry sump systems. Alrighty, next up we need to drain the oil tank on the Beamer. What we're going to do is actually dismount the oil tank, pull it away from its mounting points and tilt it this direction so all the oil will come out of this drain plug. Alright, let's do it. Alright, oil tank has been drained. We've remounted the oil tank and installed the drain plug with a new crush washer. Let's keep going. Okay, I've moved us over to the right-hand side of the bike because next up we need to drain the engine sump. The engine sump drain plug is located right here. Alright, let's do this. Alright, the engine oil sump has been drained. We've reinstalled the drain plug with a new crush washer and have torqued that down to 29.5 foot-pounds. Next up, the oil filter. Alright, to gain full access to the oil filter housing cover, we first need to remove the primary sprocket cover. So let's do that. Alright, so if we just remove this oil filter housing cover, we know what's going to happen. The remaining oil that's inside the cavity where the oil filter sits is going to simply just poop out and make a mess of things. To prevent that, I like to just take a piece of aluminum foil and just kind of jam it in there and make kind of a makeshift funnel. I also like to duct tape it in place for safety reasons. So there you go, Bob's your uncle, or in this case, Reynolds your uncle. Alright, so we've installed a new oil filter along with an O-ring for the cover. We have torqued the 3 mounting bolts to 7.5 foot-pounds. We've also reinstalled the cover for the primary sprocket. Next up, we're going to fill it up with oil. I've completed the oil change on the F650 by filling the oil tank with about 2 quarts of oil, running the bike for 30 seconds or so, and then topping off the oil until the oil level reads at just about midpoint on the dipstick. Job done. I like the F650. It feels light, nimble, it's got plenty of power. I also think it looks pretty good. And apparently I'm not the only person that thinks this way, because BMW has sold a lot of these bikes. And this one's got heated grips. So even in shitty weather like this, I can just keep riding.